Give me liberty and give me Annette.
Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, history, politics, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. And you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and if you want to see what we look like, go to youtube.com/Annette Talks. You can also find me on Facebook/Annette Talks. And today we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart and also to my guest, John Ziegler. Hi, John.
Hi, Annette.
And for those of you that don't know John, he's been on a few times before, and it's always a good episode. And John writes for Mediaite, and you have an Individual One podcast, and you are on freespeechbroadcasting.com, right? That's where your podcast can be found, as well as Twitter @ZigmanFreud. And you talked about maybe a second podcast last time. How's that coming?
We're still working on it. It's been quite an endeavor, but hopefully we'll be out with that either late this year, early next year.
All right, awesome. You'll have to keep me posted on that. So today we're going to be talking about something that's very, very annoying, and you're taking the lead on it in your state. But it's about school starting or not starting again in the fall. And I have to tell you, I had my third meltdown of the pandemic last Sunday. I had gone to church, and everyone, for the first time in almost 5 months, and everyone was in masks and social distancing and hand sanitizing and all this. And it was really hard to focus on, the purpose of being at church when all I could think was, this shouldn't be happening. We should be able to do what we want in church. We should not be masking up and all this. And then I went home and I saw the Denver Post article saying that my school district, Douglas County School District, was going to go hybrid. And we had been told for several emails that we were going to be doing entirely in school unless you opted out and you opted into online learning. And so to come home and see that, they had decided, oh no, hybrid, that means the kids will be in school 2 days a week and at home online 3 days a week. And so it didn't matter if that's what we wanted or not, that was the option. And it's much worse for the other school districts out here. I think Jefferson County and Denver Public Schools, and I'm not sure about Arapahoe, but have all gone 100% online as well. And it's just maddening. And you have a similar situation there in California, and you're actually doing something about that. Do tell.
Well, for a long time, since it was obvious that the schools here in California were not going to be open, and let me just be clear right off the bat, I cannot stand it when our school district sends us their weekly Friday late afternoon email on the update on reopening schools. Schools are not reopening. That is not happening here by order of our governor. In 32 counties on the watch list, including my county, Ventura County, we are not reopening schools. We are going to do some sort of fake online learning, which in the spring was a colossal joke, especially for my daughter, who was in first grade at the time. I mean, just a complete joke, like a couple of half-hour bogus sessions a week. That was all it was. I mean, it was a joke. It was like you just keep in touch with this person you used to know who was your teacher, and you all say hi for half an hour, and then that's it. There was no learning going on. And my wife has been on me to find out about, well, how can this all be legal? And if it, shouldn't there be some sort of lawsuit? And she was really kind of on me about it quite a bit. So I was trying for a while to find somebody who would file such a lawsuit, and it turned out that we did find a law firm out of San Francisco, oddly enough, the Dillon law firm, that was interested in doing this. So I signed on as a plaintiff and was one of the 9 original plaintiffs of a lawsuit against Governor Newsom in an effort to try to actually open schools. And since that time, I believe we've added a few more plaintiffs. And, it's interesting that you mentioned the hybrid formula. There's all sorts of different theories about how to do this. The hybrid formula makes the least amount of sense to me. For a number of reasons. First of all, obviously, if it's okay to go to school for 2 days a week, why is it not okay to go 5 days a week? They'll say, well, we're able to reduce the class size and therefore increase social distance, which, by the way, for the younger kids, anyone who knows in the real world, that's never going to happen.
No.
You're not going to be able to get young kids to socially distant or wear masks. It's just not possible. You're a moron if you think that it is. But the heart of why the hybrid makes no sense to me, and it's very frustrating because it's in the ballpark of maybe what the right way to do this is, yet they screw it up. It's because the surveys have shown that a good percentage of parents want online learning. Now, that's their call, fine, whatever. But if you just allowed this thing to work its way out naturally, and let's say there's whatever the number is, 40% of parents want online learning. If you did the 40% or more, in some cases, that want online learning, wouldn't that naturally create a situation where your class size of people who were in school would be reduced to the point where you could, in theory, increase the social distancing? Now, there would be issues as far as staffing of teachers, but I gotta believe we could figure this out. And so the hybrid model, and not to mention, it's the greatest disruption to parents possible. Because what are you supposed to do with that? That to me is literally the most disruptive and inconvenience possible with the least amount of advantage.
Yeah.
The only tiny advantage I see, and one of the many reasons why online is going to be a disaster. It's going to be a disaster, especially among younger kids, is because, again, I have an 8-year-old who's supposed to be going into 2nd grade. The reason why, if you look at this as an analogy of an airplane, in the spring, for the first 6 months of the school year, they had gotten the plane off the ground. The pilot, the teacher, had established their authority, their connection to the passengers, were in the air, and then all of a sudden they decided, sorry, we got to land this thing. And, they land it very abruptly and, in a very stupid fashion. But at the very least, they were able to ride that out for the last couple of months because the kids knew the teacher and had accepted the authority of the teacher, and they had a connection to the teacher. My daughter liked her teacher. So they were able to pretend for a couple of months that we could still do this. None of that is going to be, the plane's not in the air in the fall. The plane is going to be on the ground. And there's going to be no way to get the plane off the ground because, especially with the younger kids, you need an in-person connection with the teacher in order to do that. You're not going to know your classmates. In many cases, you're not going to know your teacher at all. The teacher, by the way, has no carrots, no sticks. How are you can't reward the kids. You can't punish the kids. You have nothing except a very glitchy Zoom circumstance, which again, now maybe at the college level, maybe at the high school level, but grade school and below, good luck. Good luck.
Well, what happens is the same thing that happened in the spring is going to happen again in the fall. Parents are the ones that have to sit there and try and figure out some kind of carrot and stick. That's what was so horrific about when my kids came home and all of a sudden we had to figure out how we're going to do this thing, we had to get electronics, we had to get connections, we had to find space. I have 3 kids at home. You had to find different rooms for them to be in. I had to figure out, I have one child on an IEP, and having her at home, all of a sudden I realized how much work they were doing with her at school, because all of a sudden that was on me, who is not trained to do these things. And I'm supposed to keep her sisters on task at the same time. And so that's what's going to happen. They're not going to connect with their teachers. It's going to be their parents trying to get them to do their work.
And, one of the more startling things that I have learned in this process already, and I hope it will become part of the substance of our case in the lawsuit. I mean, there's a legal aspect of getting standing and getting a court to look at the actual facts. But to me, the most stunning fact in our situation that I've come across so far is that we have been told, very much to what you just said, that my wife and I will be expected to sign an agreement. Sign an agreement with the schools that, and I'm not exaggerating, but I don't have the exact verbiage in front of me, but I'm not exaggerating. The way I interpret the agreement is we will be responsible for teaching the schoolwork to our kid, that we are taking the responsibility as if our kid is taking a sabbatical from school. In other words, they even relate it to if you take off a week or two for a bereavement or a once in a lifetime trip or something like that, that the parents in those situations have to sign an agreement that they will teach the curriculum as given to them by the teacher. This is going to be the norm. This is at the basis of how they're going to do this. And I'm like, whoa. Forget about the logistics and the realistic nature of that. From a legal standpoint, to me, what they're acknowledging is what we're doing is a farce. We can't do it. Mm-hmm. And we are not providing what is guaranteed by the public school system, that being a legitimate public school education. That there's no guarantee in that we're going to give the parents guidance on how to teach their own kids. I mean, that's essentially all they're doing. And so that was stunning to me. And I think a very strong indication that our lawsuit is on the right track.
Yeah, I read the whole thing. Well, I skimmed through a lot of the declaratory judgment, some of the legalese. But I'm an attorney. I'm used to reading this stuff. And it looked to me like you guys have a great case. I don't know how it's going to go, but I don't know what basis they turn this down on. What?
Well, the basis will be that the judges are pro Newsom and they don't want to go up against Newsom. And that's one of the major challenges we have here. Mm-hmm. Is that, all the way up until the Supreme Court, and even now with, John Roberts turning into a full lib.
Oh, I know.
Up until the Supreme Court, all the courts that you would come into on the federal level from California, including the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, are going to be all very pro-Democrat. Now, what I find from a political standpoint to be fascinating is I truly believe that if Donald Trump came out against schools reopening, that the Democratic position and the teachers union position would be, hell no, you can't stop us from doing this. I really, truly believe that would be the position. And therefore the courts might look at this very, very differently. But as you probably know, maybe know more about this than I do, but the legal heart of our case, I believe, is the equal protection issue, mm-hmm. Which is that let's be clear about how this happened. To me, I'm a big believer in timelines and domino effects. And so Trump comes out in favor of schools, and then immediately the hard left feels like they must revolt against that. And Los Angeles comes out and says, hell no, we ain't opening. And their union issues some of the most ridiculous demands to reopen. They were so absurd, as I'm sure you're aware, Ned.
They wanted Medicaid for everyone. They wanted, what was it? Funding for illegals. They wanted, it was just all sorts of crazy stuff that had nothing to do with school.
Right. When my wife told me about it, I literally thought she was joking or mistaken. I thought it was a parody. I did. I thought it was a parody. And so, but then Orange County, just south of Los Angeles, their board voted to open up school 5 days a week in person with no masks. Now, in my view, knowing the way Newsom works and how his MO has been, I believe that was the spark that made him feel like, okay, I cannot allow that to happen, because if Orange County opens and it all goes okay, the teachers union is going to be humiliated, and I'm going to be humiliated.
Before your phone rang, we were talking.
Sorry about that. So Newsom, I think, felt as if Orange County was a threat to this what I would view as a cover-up, basically. And therefore he needed to step in and stop Orange County from embarrassing Los Angeles, the teachers union, and the rest of the state. So Newsom steps in and says, any of the 32 counties that are on our watch list, where I am dictator and supreme ruler because of the virus, I am going to ban from having either public or private school, which is just mind-blowing from any concept of legality that I've ever understood. By the way, we're in a state where the governor has no actual authority over the schools, and so here he is under this emergency declaration saying, I'm going to close private and public schools in these 32 counties. Well, that, according to our lawsuit, creates an equal protection problem, because there are a whole lot of counties in California where schools can and probably will be fully open. And so because of that, I believe that's what the lawyers think is, the camel's nose under the tent or whatever, get your foot in the door to be able to have this lawsuit get traction. I hope that will be enough. I don't know. As we've seen recently, unfortunately, the law doesn't always dictate how these legal situations go anymore. And oftentimes it's pure politics. And I expect that there's a chance that'll happen here.
So you filed the complaint a few days ago, and is there a hearing set, or what's going on?
I honestly do not know what the next step is. I mean, that the lawyers are keeping us in constant updates with the situation, but I've not heard of a hearing date being set. I do know these people are very serious. This is not hey, let's file a lawsuit to get on Fox News Channel one time, raise a few bits of money, and then go away. There are many lawyers working on this. There's a PR firm that's been hired. There's been political polling by a major polling firm that has been done here in the state of California that will be released soon with the polling data on what the public believes about schools opening. There's going to be what I believe to be a sustained media campaign to try to get the word out about this lawsuit and why it's important. So I wouldn't be involved with this if I didn't think it was legitimate and important. I'm a realist, so I don't know what will eventually come out of this, but I do think from a principled standpoint, it's incredibly important that somebody take a stand. And look, I want to be clear. I mean, this is not without risks. Everybody knows this is not without risks. I am baffled by so many things in this pandemic environment, but one of them is, when did we start to believe that life was completely without risk? I mean, this is new information to me. I mean, I don't even know if this data is theoretically available, but I would love to know how many students and teachers on a yearly basis in this country die or get severely injured traveling to and from school.
Right.
It has to be in the hundreds at least.
Well, and I had a friend make a comment on my Facebook page when I posted that we were doing this, and I shared the link to the lawsuit, and I'll do that on the show notes as well. And one of the points she made was that she said, okay, a lot of teachers are afraid to go back, which is what I've seen as well. Teachers and parents, and you know, it's funny, in Douglas County, they wanted to open it, and actually, I'm surprised, but our governor was in favor of opening with restrictions, of course. And the Colorado Health Department and Department of Education actually had a press conference, a live press conference, and they laid out the case for opening the schools up, right? And they laid out a lot of the same information that's in your lawsuit about like the CDC and the American Pediatric Association, talking about how, yes, you need to open the schools and go back, right? But we still have all these teachers and parents who are just bound and determined to be afraid. But the point that my friend made was, okay, schools did not close immediately in the spring when this thing was, you know, starting to get big. Why is it that when the schools closed, we didn't 2 weeks later see a bunch of teachers getting sick and dying? So schools can't be as dangerous as what some people think.
Well, you know, you've hit on a point that I have thought about, I've written about for Mediaite, and I'm still frankly confused by. And here in California, we're really at the epicenter of this issue because the evidence is overwhelming that this virus was in the state of California as early as at least December of last year. And so we did all sorts of things here in California from December to the end of March, including obviously school on a regular basis. We had lots of sporting events. We had massive numbers of Kobe Bryant memorials, people hugging and all over each other. I mean, California, in theory, should have been on fire by March. We had the LA Marathon on March 9th, which is, in retrospect, you know, mind blowing that actually happened, and so combined with this anecdotally, which I'm always very hesitant to go with anecdotal descriptions, but a lot of people are completely convinced that they got this in December, January, February area. And so I was of the belief that maybe we had, that what you're saying was very valid and like, hey, why didn't schools cause all this? And then, you know, in the last few weeks, we've had this great increase in the number of new cases, a somewhat increase in hospitalizations, and an increase in our death rate. And so I don't know how to make that all work. I feel like there's something that doesn't make sense, that we're maybe down the line we're going to fully understand it. I think your point is still something that should be considered. I don't know that it's quite as definitive as I might have thought it was a few months ago. But the bottom line, though, is that this has been done elsewhere in the world. Now it's not gone perfectly, and this is the key point about why. Unfortunately, we've created a set of circumstances where school is politically unworkable, because we have now created a standard, much like baseball has created a standard, and sports in general, where if you get one or two cases that are positive, even if the people aren't even sick, it has created a circumstance where the media immediately believes you need to shut it down, and panic should ensue. And And to me, okay, we might as well just quit. I mean, because if those are the rules, I'm sorry, that's not workable. I mean,
Yeah.
we're dealing with a situation where this virus, there are people who believe that already 30% of the population has been exposed to it, and that eventually the majority is going to be exposed to it.
Mhm.
How in the world can you possibly put a standard that no new cases? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
But there are so many negatives to the kids not going to school that I don't think those with the fear of the virus and that are hooked into the new cases. It's like they ignore everything else. It's like that's it. Where it's just completely tunnel vision focused on we're going to contain this virus. We're not going to have any new cases. I guess, like you said, that's the new standard. That they can't see any of the negatives to keeping kids home. It's all about we're going to follow our fear and we're going to insist that no one's going to be exposed somehow.
I'm right there with you, and I am baffled by how we have this disconnect to the consequences of our actions. There's all sorts of ways you can look at this, but to me, when you decide, all right, we're not going to have school, and let's be clear, we're not going to have school. Online is not school. I don't even think hybrid is school. That is ensuring with 100% certainty massive damage. That's not just short term. It is long-term damage. We could talk for an hour at least on all the things that will cause problems with forever. So you're ensuring this damage to prevent possibly an unknowable amount of damage in the short run that science tells us probably won't be nearly catastrophic. Now that makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. So let's be clear. So in order to potentially avert a non-catastrophe that will be bad, let's be clear, it could be bad. No one wants anyone to die.
Right.
But unfortunately, death is part of life. But in order to avoid that, we are going to ensure with 100% certainty. It's kind of like, all right, if you were told you might get cancer down the road, we're not sure. It's a small percentage chance that you're going to get cancer. But in order to potentially avert that, we're going to amputate your right leg.
I knew that was where that was coming from. Yeah. Because then guess what? You'll never get cancer in that leg because it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. So okay. Well, I'm sorry. I would be happy. That's a risk I'm willing to take because I don't really care about life without both legs. Do I want to die? No, but that is worth the risk.
Yeah.
You're ensuring that we're going to be handicapped dramatically forever. And my gosh, my wife put out an idea that it sounds crazy, but I believe that from a realistic standpoint, I want to separate this from the lawsuit and the legalities of it. And I 100% believe we should be going, at least trying to go back to school in person. But in the world we're living in now, I would much prefer, I don't know if you're going to agree with this or not, but I would much prefer to say, you know what? Let's scrap the whole thing. We're just going to put a pause on education for an entire year. Everyone will be frozen at their current grade level. We'll see you next September. We'll do nothing at all. By the way, teachers, of course, will not get paid. Administrators will not get paid. No one's going to get paid. We will stay safe from the virus. You all stay home, stay in your beds. By the way, please do not get in a car based upon your view of risk. Please stay out of an automobile. But we will do nothing. This way, all that happens, and in my view, the long-term damage would be a lot less because We wouldn't be pretending to do a year of education when it's not really there. All that would happen is we would just increase the age by 1 year of when people were done with their public education.
Well, the problem is that year that there'd be all sorts of backsliding of skills that the kids had. You know, maybe not if you're 6, but if you're 12 and you don't read all year, or that kind of thing. My idea was this. Okay, all you teachers that are afraid to teach, go find a different vocation. Let people like me come. I've got a bachelor's, I've got a law degree. I'm not afraid to teach. Go ahead and let's waive teacher certification, and let's let a bunch of us that aren't afraid to go in.
Good luck with the teachers union agreement.
I know. Well, first of all, I'd say get rid of the unions is the first thing I would do.
Well, to your point, though, I do think we should offer, if we were going to do this, the first thing you do is you offer at-risk teachers a year sabbatical.
Yeah.
We just, you don't want to do this, take a year sabbatical.
Yeah.
Now, you would have to get some sort of concessions as far as, all right, who's going to be allowed to teach. And look, we are in a bad situation. Nobody is pretending that there are perfect answers, but we have chosen literally the worst possible solutions in almost every situation. I had no idea we were this dumb as a nation. I really didn't. I knew we were dumb, but I can't think of almost anything that we have done that wasn't the dumbest possible path we could take.
It sure seems that way.
And schools are an example of this. And again, I want to emphasize, look, I have no doubt that kids are going to get this if we have in-person school. However, in my view, if done properly, that's actually not a negative. For the most, kids are going to, this may shock people, kids get the flu every year. Mm-hmm. Kids miss school every year because of the flu. They are actually less susceptible, apparently, to major ramifications on this than they are of the flu. Once they get this, in theory, it appears as if they have some level of immunity. Therefore, they don't get it again, and it's much more difficult for the thing to spread. There was a story I read last night in Georgia, a panic story of a camp, a camp that had like 260 cases of kids getting coronavirus in a camp in Georgia. Oh my gosh! Oh, the humanity! And so I read the story, and it's a very extensive story in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. There is zero indication in the story that any of these kids went to the hospital, that any of them even got severely sick. And then what I found to be the most bizarre part of this whole thing is that, of course, there was an effort immediately to send the kids home. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. You're in the perfect situation here as long as you have, the medical treatment. You're keeping an eye on this, obviously. If someone gets very sick, you send them to the hospital. But you've isolated these kids in what, in theory, could be a perfect situation for them to all get this thing, so that they're all immune and they get rid of it. So why in the world would you send them home where they might infect somebody
right.
who's actually vulnerable?
That's funny.
We can't do anything.
No. Well, and you said, or I think I read it in the complaint, that nobody under the age of 18 has died from this in California.
Right, which is a remarkable stat. I took a lot of heat because I tweeted, and boy, people really hate it when you tweet out a fact that they don't like. Mm-hmm. But in the officially, as of, I haven't looked at the stats in the last day or two, but I believe this is still correct. Officially, in the state of California in the year 2000, the number of people under the age of 18 who
2020?
Sorry, what did I say?
You said 2000.
I'm sorry. I wish it was 2000. In the year 2020, in the year 2020, in the state of California, the number of people under the age of 18 who have died either of or even with coronavirus is 0. The number of people in 2020 in the state of California under the age of 18 who have died in a helicopter accident on their way to a basketball game is 3.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously referring to the Kobe Bryant tragedy. So, I mean, I hope that puts it in some perspective here that my gosh, I mean, all the millions, we're a state of 40 million people. I don't know how many millions there are of people under the age of 18, but it's many, many millions.
Mm-hmm.
And not one person has died either of or with. By the way, that's almost statistically impossible because, heck, if you die in a car accident and you have coronavirus, they're counting it as with coronavirus essentially. I mean, or by the way, in all seriousness, if you commit suicide and you have coronavirus, they'll count it as a coronavirus.
Yeah.
And so, or a drug overdose, we've seen that. So it's almost incredible that so far that number is still at 0. Now, of course, everyone will say, well, John, what about them transmitting it to adults or to grandma and whatever? And I'm like, look, we have limited evidence of how much that actually happens. I'm sure that it does at some degree, but guess what? You have a responsibility if you're a vulnerable person to stay away from a kid who is going to school, and the other part of that, which again, I don't understand why all logic has gone out the window. People, when they get this, they don't stay contagious forever. It's supposedly 2 weeks period of time where after which they're no longer contagious. So what's the great panic? I mean, okay, so for 2 weeks, that's why testing is important. When you test and you have it, okay, I need to stay away from everybody, especially those who are very vulnerable. But it's not forever. It's for 2 weeks. And so, I mean, we're seeing that in sports teams too, where now granted, in baseball where you have a very, very short season now, and who knows how long it'll continue, you're in a tough spot because what do you do even when those people are not showing any symptoms? But we've seen with college football in training camps, teams get huge number of cases, and I'm thinking, great, great. This is good news.
Yeah.
Because in a couple of weeks, if you do this right, your team has got effectively herd immunity.
Right.
So I mean, we've lost our mind. I mean, I really do believe that the media is mostly to blame here because, and I've written about this in media, that they have become obsessed with this new case situation. I mean, to me, the two situations that essentially put a fork in our society, a nail in our coffin. The 2 moments, and frankly, Trump should have been screaming bloody murder about this, and he really didn't. Number 1 was when they started counting deaths as with or of. Once that was done, and then once the news media set the standard that any case of coronavirus, even without symptoms, is a news story.
Yep.
It's over.
If you Google over. Right now, you can go in and literally Google any 3-digit number and new cases, and you'll find a news story. I can go and say 1, 2, 3 new cases. Oh, there's a news story. 683 new cases. Because every time there's new cases reported, they run out and file a story like this is some huge tragedy. I'm like, people, how can you not think for 2 seconds? Well, new cases, that doesn't mean sickness or hospitalization or death. It's just someone tested positive. That's all it means. And like you said, that in most cases, that's a good thing because we're getting herd immunity. But I guess that doesn't sell newspapers.
Well,
and get clicks or whatever.
Once those 2 standards were set, it was over. It's over because you can't fight that. Because otherwise you're pro-death. And by the way, and just to take this point and extrapolate a little bit further, we have such a poor concept of numbers in our society. I will never forget the lasting lesson from my grade school years was our sixth grade social studies teacher, Mr. Schrader. Mr. Schroeder had this great idea that he was going to teach us how much a million was. And he, back then, this is back in the dark ages in the 80s, where computers were in their infancy. And we had this computer printout where you could fill the pages with these tiny little X's. And I forget how many X's were on each page. It was a couple of thousand, I guess. There's the most X's you could put on a page. And he wanted us to print out all these pages and wallpaper the classroom with these pages of X's to see if we could possibly get 1 million X's throughout our entire classroom. And we wallpapered the classroom as much as we could, and we didn't even come close to 1 million. I think it was like somewhere in the 300,000s if memory serves me correct. And it really stuck with me because I'm like, wow, 1 million is a incredibly enormous number. And why is that relevant to this conversation? It's relevant because when you have 1 million, or in this case, many millions, strange things are going to happen within that pool. Mm-hmm. But when any one strange thing happening is deemed to be newsworthy by the New York Times, it's going to create the impression of, oh my God, this is happening everywhere. So if a handful of people out of several million end up dying at a young age, and by the way, they never tell us the full details of what happened, what their real health situation was. Mm-hmm. But when it happens a few times, people go, oh my God, see, we're not safe just because we're young. Well, do you understand how large the pool here is? That was my immediate reaction when even Dr. Fauci was screaming about Kawasaki syndrome. Remember that? That was the scare. That was the scare thing. Oh my gosh, kids are getting Kawasaki syndrome. It must be related to coronavirus. We haven't heard anything about that in months. Uh-huh. I presume it's because they realized it's bullshit. I'm sorry.
Bull crap.
It's a bunch of baloney. And all that was basic mathematics, that when you have a pool of people this large that something is happening to, in this case they're testing positive for coronavirus, guess what? Strange things are going to happen within that pool. We had a handful of Kawasaki syndrome cases, and immediately everyone goes, oh my gosh, this must be happening to every coronavirus case. And no one wants to think about this logically. Right. As far as numbers. Weird things are going to happen when you have that large of a pool. It does not make it the norm. It doesn't even mean that it's not even, correlation does not equal causation. I mean, yes. There may not even be a causation. I mean, so it's very, very frustrating as someone who, I'm not a data expert, but I do a lot of work in data. I watch the data very carefully. I understand the concept of statistics. I've worked in political polling. It's just, this is not all that advanced stuff.
Well, it's like they say fear and faith can't coexist, but in this case, it's like fear and logic can't coexist. And as soon as the people are allowed fear to take over, they don't want to hear anything else. Like they don't want to hear that, there are all these studies out saying that kids are at much, much smaller risk of getting sick and passing it on. And they don't want to hear all the bad things that can happen, that will happen with kids not going to school. They don't, it's like, that's it. They've gripped onto this fear, this narrative that people are going to get sick and maybe die. You're going to risk my child. You're going to risk my child. Even though these kids have been out playing with each other for the last 4 months without masks, and not getting sick, and sticking them in a classroom with masks on, social distancing is actually a more controlled environment than them out playing for the last 4.5 months. And that's what they said. That's actually what I remember the doctor said when they did that that press conference with our health department and our Department of Education. They said, look, these kids have been out playing without masks for 4.5 months. They're actually going to be in a more controlled situation if they go back to school with masks and social distancing and cohorting and all that. But it's like people just don't want to hear it, because I'm watching the comments during this press conference, and over I'm hearing, oh, it's too risky. You're taking a chance with my kid. You're not experimenting with my kid. And just, it's like, really?
No, Annette, I agree with you that that fear destroys people's power of logic and thought. I also agree with you that our side has lost this argument, at least in the political sphere. And I think it's partially because of Trump. I really do believe Trump is so toxic that to, at least 55% of the public, as soon as he's in favor of something, they're against it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. And when that, and of course the media, it's 100% in the media, it's 100% in academia, it's 100% in the scientific community, it's 100% in sports. And those things have a great influence on those that aren't politically partisan. And so I do think, and I'm always looked at as a pessimist, but I actually think of myself as a delusional optimist. I think there's a possibility that that the left may have bit off more than they can chew here. Let's pretend. Let's look at this best case scenario. Let's pretend there are going to be some schools that open. I mean, they're going to be. I mean, I don't know how many, but I mean, it's not going to be a majority. It's going to be in mostly conservative areas, but there are going to be some schools that will open essentially close to normal. Now, of course, the media has already set a standard that's impossible, because if they get one case, oh my God, shut it down. I don't know that the public fully buys that. I would like to believe that a majority of the public understands that that's not realistic, but that will have an influence. But let's pretend, and this is why Governor Newsom could not allow Orange County to open. Let's pretend that there are no major disasters with the schools that actually open in person. And by October, parents realize this online thing is just a complete disaster, right? I mean, this is just a complete joke. I would like to believe at that point, public opinion on this is going to turn hard, because they're going to be, especially a lot of suburban moms who are like, my life is just a disaster, while, in, I don't even know where, Iowa or Wisconsin or someplace, these schools are open and they're not having any big problems. What the hell is going on? I mean, I think that is a possible scenario. Now the media is going to circle the wagons hugely. I mean, you saw what happened with Sweden. I mean, any school district that opens is automatically Sweden, and they must be destroyed. I mean, if Orange County had been allowed to be opened, my gosh, the entire media industrial complex would have been there at every school, doing tests themselves to try to find some kid that had coronavirus or had the sniffles. I mean, that's the way it would have gone down. So I'm realistic here. I mean, it's a very small needle to thread, but I think it's a needle that could be thread with any luck. And I've been wrong on some of this stuff before. I really believe there's a chance that by September, we're going to see the data look very different. I mean, I think it's possible that this thing, we're going to, we look what happened with Sweden. I mean, Sweden, it ended up falling off a cliff in a fairly short order. Now there's differences, but, and hopefully that will maintain itself. But it is possible that we are seeing really in this second spike, even though it's really, just a different region of the country. It is possible that the data is going to look very different a month from now. And if that's the case, and remember, the data is way behind reality. So if in September the data starts to look much better, and that means the reality is even way better than that. I think it is possible we're going to see some success stories in the schools that do open. And if that happens, I would like to believe that we're going to see a change in public opinion.
Well, I hope so. Your lips to God's ears, because there are a lot of us moms, and there are going to be a lot of dads too, who are not going to be able to work full time. That was my plan for the fall, was to go out and work full time. And I can't do that now. I can't leave 3 kids at home 3 days a week. Even if I trusted them, they'd probably kill each other. But I'm going to have to be there to make sure that they're doing their schoolwork, and driving them, because they can't go on the bus, which is another irritant. But and we're going to see a lot more kids getting behind, and all the bad things that are listed in your lawsuit that I want people to go and check out, that we know are going to happen when people aren't in school. Kids that don't speak English, kids that have IEPs, kids whose parents are not tech savvy, that aren't going to be able to get any kind of education at all. More kids being abused, more kids not getting their lunch that they usually get at school, just a plethora of problems.
That's the most bizarre part of this is that, the Democrats pretend to be in favor of the lower income people, and it's the lower income people that are going to get crushed by this.
Yeah, there are going to be kids left at home, young kids left at home, because parents have got to go to work. And they don't have the luxury of finding something online or whatever. They're blue collar workers out. They got to go back. So you're going to have little kids sitting at home, supposedly on a computer, doing their whatever, people.
Well, we already know from the spring that huge numbers of kids are never even going to log on, that they will effectively drop out of school. And there's nothing that the schools can do about it, if only because the numbers are going to be so large, it's not going to be enforceable. And when some of these lower income situations, especially here in Southern California and the immigrant community, my gosh, I mean, you got 4, 5, 6 kids living in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. Would they even have a computer? It's going to be chaos.
Yeah, we're going to hamstring these kids. It's just completely unnecessary and unfair. And I really hope that this lawsuit gets some traction, and I hope that a lot more people jump on board with looking at the situation and understanding what's really going on here, that it's politics and it's not about logic and it's not about keeping the kids safe. So, well, keep me posted on what goes on with this, and I'll have you back on again and tell me where the lawsuit's at and what the next steps are, and no matter which way it goes. But I'm going to keep making a big stink about this too, because this is just too important. And I'm glad that you're out there and you're doing this and you're speaking up. And as crappy as it is, it's better to at least feel like you're trying to stop some of this stuff. You're trying to make a change. You're not just sitting home and whining about it. So,
well, I appreciate that, and thank you for your support, and I'll certainly keep in touch with it.
Awesome. All right. So John can be reached at, you can be found at Individual One Podcast. His podcast is Individual One Podcast at freespeechbroadcasting.com. Twitter at Zigmanfreud. Facebook, just John Ziegler. And did I miss anything? You're a Mediaite.
Yeah,
right.
that pretty much does it.
And you can find this podcast, Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, at youtube.com/Annette Talks, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and AnnetteTalks.com. And let us know what you think about this. What do you think your kids should be going back to school? Yes or no? Why or why not? And thank you for listening.